Welcome to Frequency. I'm Jenni Field.
And I'm Chuck Gose. Frequency is your go-to for real talk about comms, culture, and employee experience beyond the buzzwords and straight to what matters. And Jenni, this week, I want to kick off by sharing a little bit of a disappointment.
Okay.
We need to talk about your LinkedIn reaction.
Okay.
Is what we need to talk about. So I reposted one of my favorite photos of you, which is you sharing with everyone that you think I'm number one. And more around that this is our 20th episode of Frequency, and just sort of commemorating that a little bit. And LinkedIn gives you a variety of options to react to a post. You could celebrate, you could be insightful, you could love, you could show support, and you just do the Gen X thumbs up.
That's cool.
Just a little disappointing.
I mean,
just a little disappointing. That's all.
It takes a lot to get praise from me, Chuck. I feel like I'm just saying work harder.
But that's why we get along. That's why. You'll
be so full of joy when I do something that is funny or I celebrate it. You'll be like, oh, I nailed it.
That's it. Okay, I appreciate that. All right. So, but I found a way for you to make it up to me, though. Let me follow through on this idea fully before you reject it. So I saw that you had started recording like the audio version of your book. Awesome. Congratulations for that. Have you thought about having a US voice or American voice read it? And we could just call it like Chuck's version. Kind of like Taylor Swift when she redid like the songs and it was Taylor's version. This could be your book, but it could be Chuck's version. So just kind of sit on that a little bit and just see what you see.
I'll sit on that. I have finished recording it now, so I feel like that window of opportunity might have left us, but I will consider it. We can
record at any point in time. This could be like version 2 of it, like a reprint. We could do like, again, Nobody Believes You, Chuck's version in script, or down below it. Just think about it.
Chuck.
No, that's a bit harsh.
Have I crossed the line there?
That's a bit harsh. That's a bit harsh. Let's get into the articles you picked for this week,
nice.
Jenni.
We'll stop there. So I have got some really great articles this week that are focused on the changes that are happening in the world of work and really what that means for internal comms teams. So we're going to look at the recent news about CEOs being more clinical about work and the Gen Z population echoing that approach. I'm also going to share some insight into attention spans, which I know is a topic you enjoy. And that's specifically looking at the generation that grew up with smartphones and what that means for behavior change inside organizations. And I also want to delve into what makes a great all-employee meeting. But first, I want to talk about streamlining how we communicate. Now, this was an article that was in Harvard Business Review, and it's called "It's Time to Streamline How We Communicate at Work." Very straightforward. The world of communication at work is noisy and it needs to be streamlined. This isn't new, but it's becoming more and more urgent as time goes on. And the RTO mandates coming in, the hybrid work becomes more of the norm, and therefore it's just noisier and noisier and noisier. In the article, they consider a few real-world breakdowns. So they give examples where a manager sends a detailed memo ahead of a decision-making meeting, only to discover that no one read it. A colleague misses an urgent Zoom call because the alert was sent via Slack, which they rarely check. A CEO delays approval of a 6-page memo because the sender didn't include a summary in the email body. And a leader preparing for a board meeting receives 5 inconsistent reports from 5 different business units, wasting hours harmonizing them. The author of the article states, effective communication isn't just about writing less, it's about making reading easier. So my question for you is, the less is more message is often talked about in the world of internal comms, but this feels so much more than that, and it requires an understanding of audience, effectiveness of channels, how to write more succinctly, not necessarily writing less. The article talks about a lot of the day-to-day comms that happen between teams, but is fixing this in the remit of the IC function, or does it belong somewhere else?
I think it elements
Okay.
of it fit. I think some of the examples you described, that's human behavior. But this kind might lead to actually a new role that I've been seeing getting posted or talked about more, which is under this like comms operations role or comms ops role, where basically you're not doing the communicating, but you're setting up the structures into how communication happens. Though I have seen it over and over again where it might be that, let's say, your organization and teams is the spot where you're like, this is where we collaborate. This is where we send messages. That might be great. Actually, it's not going to be great. That's awful because Teams is awful. But let's just say that this is the tool you're given. This is the tool you're given.
All it takes is one leader to be in like, yeah, I don't like Teams. I'm going to send emails. You actually can't make me use Teams. And so all a comms person can do is set up the guidelines, the expectations, the way we do things. But it just takes one person to be like, yeah, that's not how I want to do it. And typically that's going to be at layers above the organization. No one's going to fall on that sword to tell your CEO like, hey, you got to go into Teams. You can't send an email or a memo or whatever it is out there. So I think this comms operations, I think there's actually an opportunity for communicators to think about of less the communication and more setting up the structures, but you're never going to be policing or able to fully police people going outside of those systems. So I agree, streamlining sounds great, but are the people that are violating it going to follow that? Probably not.
This for me strikes at the heart of one of the biggest challenge for internal comms functions at the moment, which is that remit of where does it stop, where does it start? Because I think there'll be people listening to those examples and feeling like it's their responsibility to fix that. And I think there'll be others that will be saying, oh, this isn't part of my remit. And I'd be really interested in where that falls in terms of who thinks it is and who thinks it isn't, because I think that's part of our challenge. I think we're getting into that messy operational middle. And I think that's where some people want to be. I'm not sure it's where internal comms should be. So I think there's some work to do there.
One of the examples that the article talked about where it was like the CEO delayed approving a 6-page memo because it wasn't in the summary of an email body. That comms isn't going to fix that. Like that's the one thing where, like, I don't know if Outlook does this, but Gmail does this, where you say the word attachment in your body, but you don't include an attachment. It's like, hey, dummy, is it?
It does
is
do
it
that.
there? So that's the tech trying to help you out. You can't.
No, and it doesn't allow for that individual preferences in terms of that you've got to communicate those. Like, I prefer to have a summary in my email, then I'll read the attachment, but that's my preference. Communicate that as a leader or an individual, and that just helps people. That sort of brings us nicely onto the next article, which is about attention spans. And this was a post on LinkedIn by Jonathan Haidt, who was talking about the attention apocalypse. Now, you hate this topic, but I'm going in.
I actually love this topic, but keep going.
So there is data that shows that our attention spans are getting worse. I am going to caveat, though, to say that this is in part due to the noisiness of the world that we live in now. But in this post from Jonathan, he shares a graphic that shows by age sort of how noisy the world we live in is contributing to our inability to make plans and follow through on them. So he's talking about how people feel distracted, they're less outgoing. And all of this for me has links into what this means for when we're at work. And these are people's own self-assessments. And as he says, they're a terrible indictment on a childhood with phones. He also has written the book, The Anxious Generation. And he says in the article, as he's written in that book, this isn't the fault of Gen Z. We raised them this way. We overprotected them in real life and underprotected them online, which I think is an incredible statement. He goes on to say, we gave them infinite scroll and a never-ending 24/7 comparison to the most beautiful, successful and unrealistic role models, instead of long days of playing and bonding with real friends, like every previous generation had as children. They are anxious and depressed in large part because they are losing 9 hours a day in their formative years to screens just for entertainment. Now, the graphs that show, they show age 60 plus, age 40 to 59 and 16 to 13. And you can really see that difference in terms of age groups that persevere until something's finished versus easily distracted. So the easily distracted is the 16 to 39 is really high, and the can be careless for them is really high. Now, in terms of attention spans, what I also saw at an event when I was at an event back in June in the UK, there always used to be the stat that you needed to see something 7 times in order for people to do something, or you need to take action. That has now increased to 28.8. So our need to hear something again and again, because there's just so much noise, I do think is starting to prove true. So let's think about that data in the world of employee engagement and internal comms. And my question for you is, what should internal comms professionals be doing to address this challenge? Is this something HR teams need to be looking at for development workshops and courses on offer for people as they start work? What is the impact for organizations that they can take from this?
So a lot of this data I agree with. And I do want to call out the one statement that you mentioned about how we overprotect them in real life and underprotect them online. That 100% speaks to the age gating issues that are out there in a lot of apps, and the access that younger generations have when their brains are forming and all of these things. My challenge with this, though, is if you were to go back to 1991, when I was 16 years old, and you would have compared me to other generations on who's going to make plans and follow through more. It's the older you are, the more likely you're going to make plans and follow through versus the younger you are. Perseveres until finished. Again, the younger you are, you're probably not going to likely do that. The older you are, you probably are. Easily distracted. Yes, the younger you are, you're way more easily distracted than when you're older. And then can be careless. Come on. Of course, I think this is really just generational stuff. And, there's the old adage of talking about, like, the big concern that my parents had was that my sister and I were watching way too much MTV. We weren't accused of being on smartphones because there weren't such a thing, but it was the television. And we would spend hours a day watching MTV. Did that alter my brain somehow? Did that change things? I don't know, but I'm fine now. And so I think the attention span thing, though, we have amazing attention spans. We just have more choices for content now. So if let's say you lived somewhere, I'm probably getting let's say it's 80 years ago, and you had one radio station that you had access to. Man, look at your attention span on that radio station. But now, like, the choices are there. So it's actually our attention spans, I think, are just as strong. We just have less tolerance for stuff and more choices when we're not interested in what we have. We always think there's something better out there to do. We've all been sucked into, like, a Saturday afternoon watching Gone in 60 Seconds, Nicolas Cage movie. It's an enjoyable movie. It's not Oscar worthy. It's an enjoyable movie. Amazing attention spans watching The Rock.
I don't know, but I'm here for it. I'm absolutely here for it.
So we have great attention spans. What we don't have is tolerance for things that we're not interested in. I think that's the change. There's more choices, so therefore we're less tolerant of things that we just don't care about. So we're gonna make the switch.
I mean, I'm not a huge fan of generational theory. When I did my paper for my diploma back in 2012, I looked at the different generations, how they communicated, and then the impact that would have on the workplace. And that's where I started to sort of pull that apart in terms of, is this really a thing? I also agree with you on how does this compare with people of that age years ago? And I had the same question about data that I saw about stress levels that was published a while ago about this generation being the most stressed. And I thought, well, aren't we all quite stressed when we're at that age where hormones are changing and you've got exams and, what's the comparison to people in 1991 that were the same age? Like, that's the data I want to see as the context to be able to compare. But there's so much talk about generational elements in the workplace. For the first time, there's all these generations together. It was a topic at a conference I was at in June. There was a whole session on different generations and what it means. And it seems to be something that's on people's minds, but no one's really able to solve, maybe because it's not a problem to solve. But I do think that there are comms people and HR people who are worried about the different generations. Is your view, don't worry about it?
I think people like labels. They like generations. I'm a very proud Gen X member. We're the generation that everybody forgets about because everybody focuses on baby boomers and millennials. And we actually like that people forget about us. It adds to our angst in society. I think the way I would look at it though is more, there's probably a bigger gap in age in workplaces now, meaning I'm going to say 40 years ago, it was probably pretty rare of somebody beyond their early 60s to still be working. Now it's that scale has shifted, I would imagine. So now it's probably looking at, let's say, more corporate roles. You're probably going to have as young as 22. You might have old as early 70s. So all of a sudden now there's a 50-year gap when before there was probably a 40-year gap. And you go to frontline work and the gap even widens more because you could have as young as, I think, 14, 15, 16, depending on where you work, all the way up to early to mid 70s. So you could have a 50, almost 60-year gap in age range in your workplace. Of course, there's going to be style differences in there. Like, why would there not be that? So I don't know why we're surprised by this.
We'll just file that in there. Of course it is. Just keep going sort of box that I think we probably should start in internal comms. Of course, that's the thing. Just move on. Something that's come up and inspired by an article that was posted by The Gathering Effect, but it led me to think about our need to spend time on outcomes and purpose. So the article was talking about how you could improve your employee town hall. And that popped in my head as I was reading it, alongside some recent client conversations where I've been talking about the town hall, the all-staff meeting, whatever you want to call it, and how they need to be purposeful and aligned to organizational needs. Because what I see still happening a lot is focusing on the channels, not the content. And I can see where internal comms people will say, oh, you know, the next town hall is scheduled for X date. What should we talk about? And I think we always do it that way round when it should be the other way round. So what's the outcome or the content? And then what's the best way to communicate that? But what I liked in the article from The Gathering Effect was a really nice graphic that showed a content agenda versus an effect agenda, which I would probably call an outcome agenda. So on the content agenda, it had a bullet pointed list that was welcome, Q1 review, finance update, engineering, HR update, product news, close, right? I feel very comfortable with that agenda. I've seen that many a time. The effect agenda had 3 bullet points. The first one being develop a company-wide understanding of our Q1 results and business health. The second bullet point was expand your knowledge of department goals, progress, and how it impacts you. And the third was learn how we prioritize features and what it means for our customers. And I really liked it. So I suppose my question for you was, what's your advice to make a town hall or all employee meeting successful? And in a world where these are more online than ever before, some may be hybrid, what's the thing that internal comms pros need to get right to make this an event that all employees want to come to?
Yeah, we actually talked about this inside Ecology recently. So I love this focus, and I love the visual that's in the article that compares the content agenda versus the effect or outcome agenda, as you described it. And as you were reading through that content agenda and you're like, yeah, I've already seen this before. Guess what? So have your employees. And they've already tuned out because they don't really care that much. And so I love thinking about this from what are the effects or the outcomes that we want to have as a result. But I think that's just step one. I think it's really around like, how are we going to get them to care? How are we going to get them to pay attention to these things? I think that's then the next bigger question, because first off, look at the true cost of hosting an all-employee meeting, virtual or not, town hall. Look at how many people come in, an hourly rate, ballpark it. That is a true cost. Now, that's not cost that's going to show up in a budget somewhere, but that's people's time. And they're making a choice with their time and how they're going to spend, or if they're going to pay attention, or is this going to be up on a screen because you're actually monitoring who shows up and they're in their Slack and sending memos that aren't being approved in the other screen. So I like this idea of looking at the outcomes and then getting to the why. So one of their examples was We want to expand your knowledge of department goals, progress, and how it impacts you. Great. Well, how are you going to do that? How are you going to do that to where people then actually pay attention? And I think we need to look at the word entertainment more. Like, how are we actually going to entertain our employees? We talked about the attention span thing that you just mentioned. They're going to go to another screen pretty quickly on this, and they might be somewhat listening if you're lucky in the background. But how are you going to get this? How do we go back to must-see TV? How are you going to go back to getting people to pay attention? And so that was one of the things we talked about inside Ecology was, have we done wrong by the town hall? When they were in person, typically, and then we switched to hybrid, but kept them in largely the same format and just had faces on a screen, that really wasn't the point of them. And then now we've gone back to whatever shape your workplace is in, remote, hybrid, you're stuck 5 days a week, whatever it is, we're still treating them as if like people are still at home watching them. So one of the ideas we came up with, but I would love to see a tech company come up with a way to do this. Imagine if you could do your town hall TikTok style. Like, this is what we talked about. Where like something comes up and you don't like it, swipe. HR comes up, swipe. Whatever it is. Because guess what? You're going to get the data on that. They're going to stop and listen and watch the things that they actually care about or entertain them. And they're going to swipe past the things that they actually don't. You're not forcing them to sit through this 30, 60-minute show that they may not really care about. You want them to care about it, but then
how do you balance that with the people that are presenting or hosting and their skills in doing that? Because to be a great CEO or a great CFO or any of the other CMOs, your skill set is in that sort of specialist area. What we're saying is that you've also got to be able to do this. And I don't know that that's fair.
I don't think they should. Why? Who says they have to be the host?
No, but if they're presenting and they don't necessarily have...
Who said they have to be the presenters?
Traditionally they are, but again, what if everybody is not great? What if you've got an organization of people where actually there's no one that wants to or likes presenting, they don't want to do it? Like, is it something that we feel that we should train and develop people in, and it's now like a non-negotiable that you have to be able to get on stage, virtual or otherwise, and entertain?
It sounds like you shouldn't be doing town halls then. But let's peel back the entertain part a little bit. One of my favorite town halls that I've ever attended was led by a customer success manager, a CSM, as they're known in other terms. She is a massive boy band fan and did the entire town hall weaving in like NSYNC and 98 Degrees lyrics, because guess what? It actually made it fun. It made it interesting. It made it entertaining. And so people stuck around, people enjoyed it. And you got to see a new side of her that didn't come out in normal work conversations. That's the type of stuff I'm talking about. Like, make it interesting. Maybe entertaining is not like jazz hands on stage, but make it interesting for people. Make it personal. I think that's the part where we're just going through that content agenda that's being shown on there. Or I like this idea too, Jenny. Previous episode, we talked about those will bucks or whatever they're called. What if you had to pull your wills together to actually get time on the town hall? Well, then your stuff better actually be worth it. Like, cause you're making an investment. You're not just like, hey, engineering, you've got 10 minutes on the town hall this month or this quarter. And engineering's like, we don't have anything. We better come up with something. Well,
that's just not the way around to do it, is it? Though? And I think that's where we get stuck with that formulaic agenda. And I was having a conversation with someone the other day where they were sticking with this is sort of how we do it. And I was like, just flip it the other way. And like, what's the story you want to tell? Sit down with the CEO and the COO for them and figure out the story, and then figure out the best way to tell that story, and then work it out from there. But don't feel like you've got to, put everyone on parade for half an hour, because people don't need that anymore, especially not now. There's so many different ways of connecting online. So I like
Well, and there again, stories are interesting.
Yeah.
Stories people pay attention to really great stories.
Yeah, exactly. The last article I want to talk about today is the role of internal comms in the new era of work. Now, this is prompted by an article from Sharon O'Day, which Shona Sullivan sent to us in our DMs on LinkedIn. And Sharon and I have had many conversations over the years, and I messaged her actually to say, we're going to talk about this. I have thoughts. So here's a quick summary of the post from Sharon. She says, in comms, we've spent the last decade or two banging on about values, belonging, purpose, and the tone has now shifted. AT&T's CEO just told 100,000 employees come back to the office 5 days a week or consider whether you still belong here. We talked about that article last week. The Chevron CEO kicked off his cost-cutting era by telling employees to be less nice to each other. And essentially, CEO comms are getting frostier. Culture's more clinical, empathy is out, efficiency is in, loyalty has gone the same way as the full salary pension. But as Sharon points out, and this is the bit that I think is really important, it's not just coming from the top. She says as you scroll TikTok, you'll see Gen Z pushing back hard, clear-eyed, boundary setting, fully aware that work isn't family and it never was. So here we are, a return to top-down orders met with bottom-up, sure Jan, energy. So I love how she writes. She goes on to say, and internal comms is stuck in the middle. We used to be the warm hug of the organisation, now with a polite bouncer at the door. I am here for this conversation because I have long been saying that comms is here to drive business outcomes. I've never been a fan of some of our professional bodies taking the tagline that we matter at work, because I think that focuses the internal comms profession in the wrong direction. But my worry is that reading this and listening to this from Sharon is so spot on for me about where it's going, but I don't know that the internal comms profession is equipped for this, because I think we're still stuck in some of that we matter at work space. So I suppose my question is this where internal comms should always have been, and it's just got lost along the way with employee engagement? Are comms pros equipped for this change, and will they be able to advise leaders and teams with the right content and strategy as the relationship between employee and employer becomes more work?
I want to go back to the very early part when you talked about that the tone has shifted with examples of like the AT&T CEO and the Chevron CEO. And I like your word of comms getting
these are
frostier
Sharon's words, but yeah,
out
I
there.
think she's spot on. Yeah.
Let's go back to our authentic conversation that we had in previous episodes. This is it. This is it. This is the authentic comms. This is what these CEOs have been believing the entire time. I think they were trying to be more reflective or mirror what they thought employees wanted. And so, okay, let's say you matter. Let's say, because that made people feel really good. Coming back and saying to people, hey, show up at work or else, doesn't make people feel good. I think now they're like, so this is authentic. You all said you wanted authenticity from your leaders. This is now what is happening. Now, your question around, is comms equipped for this? I want to say yes.
Okay.
I want to say yes, because it's simple. It's easier. It's so much easier. I agree. And I'm glad the choir's sort of changing its tune a little bit here with that employee engagement is the wrong thing for us to be focusing on. I was in an event this week and mentioned that. I do think companies should look for ways to engage employees, but the way we've been defining employee engagement is not that. And so I do think comms is equipped for this. I think that if we just let go the engagement monkey off our back, man, how much straighter we would stand. Not dragging this thing around, not worrying about are people going to say they have a friend at work, or if they like their manager, or whatever those things are. Like we release that off our back and we stand up straight more, and we go back to focusing on communicating the right things in the right way. I want us to be equipped for this.
I'm with you. I want us to be equipped for it. I worry that we're not, but I think we have to sort of see what happens. And the thing for me that I'm looking at now is what's on the agenda on industry events for the next 6 months. and how much are people that run industry events adapting to this. And I was looking at an agenda the other day for an event in the UK later this year, and I can't make sense of it at all. I was like, I don't know what. There's just a mishmash of content on here. There's stuff that isn't sort of set. I can't see a theme. I don't know where this is going. And I'm not going to take 2 days out to go to that. Like, how does that work? And I think that's the bit for me, is how is the industry going to support this? Because if there's people writing about this, we're talking about it, we can see it in the articles. I feel like the industry at large is going to let this down. And I think they're going to not start to get into this proper business outcomes, organizational alignment piece, because it's so much easier to do the other stuff.
We have a growing platform here. We also have our own platforms out there. There are the industry blowhards that are going to keep just going back to the same wheelhouse time and time again. All we can do is do what we can do. We're not going to change everybody else as a result of it. But I'm just saying this to the communicators that are listening. I think you're up for this.
Okay.
I really do. I think we let go of that engagement monkey. I don't know why it keeps coming back to that. I don't know if I've got, what was the George Michael song, Monkey on Your Back? I don't know why now that's in my head. That's been, I think, this thing that we've carried because we thought this is what leaders are going to pay attention to, and they pretended to. They kind of tricked us a little bit. They sort of led us down this path of thinking, oh, this was going to be it. Well, they've shown that it's not. And with AT&T and Chevron and Chase and others all coming out with this new stance, others are going to follow because they've now blazed this path to be like, oh, this is how they're acting.
Yeah.
We can act that way too.
And I think the point about the fact that people coming into the workplace are acknowledging, responding well, and agreeing with that, in that I don't want this to be my family. I've got a clear boundary. I finish work at this time. I'm going to have my weekend. Like, that was so alien to people. I still remember saying to someone, they said, oh, are you coming to the pub after work? And I said, no, I'm going to go home. And they were like, oh, you never come. And I was like, well, no, because I've got friends at home that I want to go and see. Don't think I said it quite like that, but it was like, it takes me, an hour and a half to get home. I'd rather be at home and see my mates than hang out in the pub after work. Like, I don't want to do that. And that was always such an alien thing for people to think, oh my God, I can't believe you don't want to hang out with people at work. And I was like, I appreciate these are my values and they're different, but I don't. And I do think that this tracks into the bigger question we've been having, or I've been having a freak out about for a while, about this employee engagement number and what that really is. And it feels like we should start to settle. But I think it's important to remember that what we're seeing is this coming from both sides. This isn't a case of just the leaders saying it and everybody else being, aghast. I think there is actually quite a meeting in the middle that's coming from this. So that brings us to the end of our articles this week. What are you freaking out about?
First off, I want to preface this by saying I hate humble brags. So I either just straight up brag, or I'm just telling a story with facts to get a point across. It might sound, but there's no humble brag element to it. So this week, earlier this week, I attended a Work Vivo event in Atlanta. Great meeting the team there, a great turnout of local communicators and HR leaders in Atlanta. And after the event, I was talking to someone. I could see this lovely lady was off to my right, and she was kind of trying to get my eyesight, but also trying to leave, and shifted my attention to her. And I was like, oh, can I help you with something? She's like, yeah, I just wanted to come up and introduce myself. I've been following you for years. Just great chance to reconnect, all this stuff. So Ashley Bailey, thank you for coming up and saying that, introducing yourself. Hopefully we have a new frequency listener, Jenni, because I was messaging her about that. And I did tell her, like, Ashley, I'm going to mention you on the podcast. That it's such a cool community that we have out there, where I think sometimes those of us that are noisy and create a lot of content sometimes forget about the visibility and the impact that we have. And so it was really nice to get a chance to talk to Ashley. And so thank you, Ashley, for one, attending the event, and two, coming up and saying hello. But shift that to just a couple hours later, I was flying out. This is where it's going to sound like I'm bragging, but I was in the Delta Lounge in Atlanta. I go out of my way to go to the D Lounge because it's nicer and it's less line. Don't ask me why. So I'm in the D Lounge and I'm kind of settling my bag and finding a table to sit at. And I turn around and this guy sitting in front of me is like, hey, And it was Jon Acuff, the author of soundtracks, who we've talked about on past episodes, kind of caught off guard. So we were just sort of bantering a bit. Like, he was coming from an event in Atlanta, and I was coming from an event in Atlanta, and he was going home to Nashville, and I was going home, and where are you going to be, and blah, 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 and all that. And I guess my point is, like, your head always has to kind of be on a swivel. Like, when you're out and about, you really don't know who you may or may not bump into. And so, one, it was really cool to have that conversation with Ashley. It was really cool to book in that with John. And yeah, it was kind of a freak out moment of being like, wow, like, this is not so much the recognition part of it, but the fact that when you are visible and creating things and speaking, like, you then get to have these kind of really cool random interactions with.
I'm still jealous
people.
that you are friends with Jon Acuff and that you just bump into him in a lounge.
You were actually the first person that I messaged about it, Jenni.
Oh, I
for
so
that
want to
reason.
meet him and say hello. That sounded a bit scary then. I should get that under control. He won't want to meet me if he hears that. She sounds terrifying, Chuck. I don't think that's a good idea. So my freak out this week kind of links to what you were just talking about in terms of the people that are doing amazing work but are often quieter, and us noisy folk are out and about. And it's something that also links to what we talked about in this episode on the content to industry events. So it's a bit of a call out to anyone that's listening, but I'm hosting a roundtable group in London in the UK in September, where I've asked people to put their hand up to come if they're a senior internal comms person, to come and talk about what they feel is missing from industry events. Because I hear this a lot, that senior folk saying, there's just nothing for me on this agenda. It doesn't really talk to me. And I don't know what that means in terms of what is it that you want to see. So David Manning, who works in the UK, fantastic guy, him and I had a chat and said, there's something in this. So we're just trying to get about 15 people together. I think we've got about 8 or 9 signed up now. It's totally free. I just want to have half a day where we could just all sit and chat and figure this out. So if you want to come, drop us a DM, either just use Frequency or get in touch with me direct, and I can tell you a bit more. But I want to hear from people rather than go to people and ask them to come, because I want to hear from those senior people that are doing the work behind the scenes that maybe aren't always at stuff, but have really, really valuable stuff to share.
I am curious to hear what they have to say, because I have heard the same thing here in the States.
Okay.
I'll just stop there, and I'll let you see what you come up with in
I
September.
had some freelancers and consultants get in touch, and I was like, I want to do that separately. I think that it changes the dynamic. And I had a few people internationally ask, and actually I did say I'll do something online for some international folks. So maybe we could do that one together, Chuck, and see if we can do something maybe with some ecology people as well, and see what we can do. Because I think there's a real opportunity to make some changes and make a difference for the senior folks out there, that I think there's a gap.
And that's where I wonder, is it an event problem, or is it a different problem, and the events are just the visible part?
And that's what I kind of want to get underneath. So yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's it for this week, for our 20th episode. Thank you for joining us. All the articles that have inspired this conversation are in the show notes, and don't forget to rate and review after you've listened. Subscribe so that you don't miss another episode, and pass this along to someone you think would enjoy listening or watching. You can find Frequency on YouTube as well. Thank you to Poet Ali for contributing the music to the show. And we'll be back next week with more news, insights, and opinions about everything comms and leadership in workplaces today. Keep tuning in and turning up.